So now we're going to light our character and render them out into a video. Lighting and rendering is actually a pretty complicated process, and since this is a beginner video, I've included this lighting setup project that we're going to use to light our character. So you can see down here that I have a plane that is spinning, and then I have some lights around the scene. So I'm going to talk about how you can adjust some of these settings for your character, but first let's import our character. So we'll come up here and we'll click File, Append, and then we're going to import our character from our scene file. So what you want to do is you want to click the file that has your character in it. So in my case, it's texture and character 01 here. And then I'm going to go to Object, and then I'll see all these objects here. And I know that I want to import the beak and the tail and the body. So there's the body and the tail and the beak. And let's hit Append. And you'll see that now it has placed our object into our scene. And if we grab this, everything should move around fine. So what we're going to do now is we're going to parent our owl to the plane. So let's click this button here, and that will take us to the first frame. You can also just drag and click over here, and we will grab our bird, and we will grab our plane, and then we will hit with shift click, and then we will hit Control P to parent and keep transform. And what that will do is make our bird spin. Now I have it set to 5 seconds. If you want it to be longer or shorter, you can change the end number here, and then you can just grab this keyframe by clicking it and hitting G, and you can move that wherever you want. Now if we come up here and click this button, we will see a render preview of what our bird looks like in the scene. Now if your computer is a bit slower, that may be hard for it, so you can click this mode here, which is called Look Dev mode, and that'll kind of give you a preview of what our character is going to look like. So what we can do here is we can now take any of these lights, and if you come over here to the light properties, you can change the color of the light, or you can change the strength of the light. So that's kind of how you can adjust those settings, and you're more than welcome to take these lights and move them around, or if you hit Shift A, you can kind of play with these lights and make your own lighting setup if you want. If we come up here to the render properties, we can see what device we're using to render. If your computer doesn't have a good video card, you may need to switch to CPU. If you don't see your video card there, you may need to come up here to Preferences and come down to System, and you can see that if we have none, that disappears, and if we switch to CUDA or OpenCL, we can click our video card there. Here are our render settings. If you're struggling to move around in the viewport or render mode, you can try turning the viewport samples down. And what samples are is they just go over and they recalculate all the 3D light over and over. So the higher samples you have, the better your image is going to look. Now here I have my sample set relatively low because I'm using what's called a denoise pass. And over here in the compositor, you can see I have a denoising node. Now when you press render, if your screen's coming out black, you may need to delete this node, and the way you do that is you just hit that and press X, and then drag this node over here and put it into this white slot right here, and then you'll render without the denoising pass. If you find that your image looks noisy when you render it, you may want to up these samples here. If your computer is taking way too long to render, what you can also do is you can lower these samples and it'll render faster, but it'll look noisier. The other thing you can do is you can come down here to the output properties, and you can change your resolution here and put a smaller resolution. Also in the output tab is where we can choose to save our export. So I'm going to save mine into this folder here, and then we can change our file format here. So for us, let's click FPEG video. Let's drop down encoding. For the container, let's choose MPEG 4, and then we can just leave this video at default settings. Mine's going to be medium quality. You can change it to lossless or perceptually lossless or whatever you want, but the file size will get bigger. And with this panel, you've kind of set your resolution, your output, and your file size, and with this panel, you're setting all your render settings. As a beginner, I want you to only focus on the sampling, but there are plenty of options here that we can do. Optimize our renders to make them look better or to render faster. If you want to adjust the focus of the camera, I have this little node right here that you can grab, and you can just kind of move that in and out and place it where you want the camera to focus on your character so that when we go into render view, you can see that there's a little bit of blur here around the edge from the depth of field of the camera, and that way we'll make sure that his eyes are in focus. Now, if you want to render a single frame, what you can do is you can just put whatever frame you want to render on, and if you tap the 0 key, it'll take you to the camera, and you press F12, it will render. And what it'll do is it's going to render your image, and then it's going to composite it with the effects over here. Now, if you're not happy with some of the effects, or if you want to play with some of the effects that are on there, what you can do is you can switch here to render result in the image view there, and you can come over here and you can just tap M and M, and what that does is that mutes the effects, and you can undo those effects and play with them as you like. I have a lens distortion here for a camera and a glare to kind of add a little bit of glare to the highlights. And then what I have here is an alpha over node, and what that does is it takes our image and places it on top of another image or color here. So if you adjust this color, you can play with your background. And you'll see there that it updates. So if you want, you can leave your bird at default lighting, but I'm actually going to add a clay shader that I made, which you can see in my render in the beginning of the video. Now, the clay shader is actually kind of complicated to make. I have an entire video on how to make that clay shader, which I will link to in the description below. But for now, I'm just going to include it in the project file and show you how to use it as a beginner. So what you're going to do is you're going to click the object you want to apply a material to. And here I've already deleted the current shader that was on my owl by selecting it and hitting this minus key. And what we're going to do is we're going to hit new by clicking this, and this will add a new material slot. And then what we will do is click down here and we will click clay. And if I switch over to render mode, you can see now that my bird looks like clay. So let's go ahead and name this owl body, and then we will come down here to the base color, click this little circle, hit image texture, and now he'll turn purple because there's no image texture. We will hit open, and then we will select our painted texture. So in this case, it's my owl body base. And then we'll go ahead and repeat that for the beak and the tail. Now you're going to need to create a new shader each time. So let's click a new material slot, and then we will click owl body because that's what we already have for our clay shader. And then we'll click this new material, and what it's going to do is create a duplicate material and name it something new. We'll name that beak, and then we'll just change this little slot right here to our beak texture, and then we can go back here, do the same process for our tail. And now our owl kind of has a fun clay texture. So then to render this, what you need to do is you can come up here and do render, and if you want to render an image, you just click render image, and if you want to render animation, you just hit render animation, and wherever you told it to output under this output tab in here, it will output with the resolution you've selected and the video codec you've selected. And with that, you should have a turntable of your character.